In 2024, NASA has a goal of launching the Artemis mission to land actual humans on the moon. As you can imagine, there's a lot goes into that.
Yes.
And it's been a long time.
It has.
Well, we've got an actual rocket scientist on the line. His name is Derek Daly. He's with the Ames Computational Aerosciences branch of NASA. And today we're going to talk about what computers are involved to make this all happen. They're using a number of different pieces of technology from Hewlett Packard Enterprise, or HPE. Thanks for joining us today, Derek.
Thanks for having me.
You're actually based out of California. I didn't know NASA had a branch there.
Yeah, that's a common situation. A lot of people in the Bay Area, they know about Google and Facebook. They don't really realize there's a NASA center right next to all that.
Are you in like a deep underground bunker, like half a mile down?
No, not at all. We are visible from quite a distance, actually, because we got some very large old Navy buildings you can see and a large wind tunnel.
Not like a strip mall near an Arby's or anything like that.
Well, there might be a strip mall and an Artemis.
So, Derek, can you tell us more about the Artemis mission? When's the first phase of that happening?
So, for the Artemis program, we have like three or four missions, like really kind of set in stone that we're trying to fly. The first one, Artemis 1, is an unmanned test flight of all the new vehicles and components, scheduled to happen sometime in 2021, hopefully by the end of the year. Right now, all that hardware has been built and is undergoing a kind of final testing. And then within about 12 months of that one, we're hoping to fly Artemis 2, which will be a similar mission, just kind of to go around the moon and come back to Earth without landing, but that'll have humans on board. And then Artemis 3 is scheduled for sometime in 2024, and that will be the first mission to land humans on the moon since 1972.
How many humans?
I think right now the plan is there'll be 4 on that mission. And I can't recall if only 2 will land or all 4 will land.
And is that going to be the same for Artemis 2, the one that's doing the sightseeing tour around the moon?
Yeah, I believe Artemis 2 is scheduled to have 4 astronauts, but the crew has not been announced to my knowledge.
If I gave you a list of a few people I wanted you to leave on the moon, could that be arranged?
I think you'd have to ask somebody else for that kind of favor.
And so when they land on the moon, what is the purpose there? Just to show that NASA can do it, and this is the precursor to further missions like to Mars and what have you? Are they collecting rocks, setting up a base? What's happening?
Well, that's a really good question. Like, definitely one of the motivations is getting set up, learning how to do Martian exploration, for sure. But this time around, it's going a little bit different from Apollo, because we're trying to land near the South Pole, where we know there's water ice there. So we're definitely trying to take a much bigger step toward sustainability off of Earth. I mean, we won't get there immediately, but this is a key step. We know there's water there. Can we use it?
So why is that important?
Well, in order to have long-term human exploration, not just, plant the flag and come back, you need to do as much getting your resources locally as you possibly can, because taking water to the moon is a very, very heavy proposition. Water is heavy and it's not terribly dense, so you need a lot of volume. That's an issue too. It's just the kind of thing where we're excited. We found so much water, especially near the South Pole of the moon. So this is kind of our opportunity to try and do something with it.
Do you have any idea of how they're going to figure that out? Obviously, you've had probes going around that, kind of go try to look into the ground to see this. Like, are they going to, be drilling, or they got picks, like trying to see if there's ice there? How's that all work?
Yeah, there's actually a number of unmanned missions currently, in the planning stages and development stages. Those are actually going to utilize a lot more commercial services than traditional NASA missions. So it's called Commercial Lunar Payload Services. And there's a number of different things. Kind of the biggest one, I think, is called Viper. And there'll be definitely a lot of resource hunting on the surface of the moon to try to understand that better before we get there.
For Artemis 2, when you're doing a sort of a flyby around, is that something that we might see some very high quality, say, video feed, or after the mission, just footage and photos that we haven't seen before, just for proximity and also the sort of advancements in technology since the last time people were really close to the moon?
And will Tom Hanks be in that one?
Probably not. I think it's a little bit risky to put a public figure like that on board. But in terms of imagery, I don't think the Artemis 2 is scheduled to get super close to the moon. So our unmanned probes probably have higher resolution pictures. But definitely having the knowledge that it was taken by an astronaut holding a camera will make that a valuable photo. In fact, I think the most published photo of all time is just such a photo of the whole Earth from, I think, Apollo 15. And you've definitely seen it.
Everybody has, yeah.
Yeah. That is amazing. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of shots they can get there. Derek, again, you're in charge of the boosters. Do the astronauts ever drop by just to make sure that you're keeping on top of things?
The astronauts do have like a designated like subset who do liaison to different areas of engineering. So there's an astronaut who often will call into the overall launch vehicle engineering review board, top level.
Just to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, because they gotta check off on these things before they get out.
Let's talk about the rockets and what it takes to actually get these astronauts to the moon. What is your role in all of this, and what type of technology are you using to figure this all out?
So my primary responsibility is working on the aerodynamics of NASA's new launch vehicle called the Space Launch System. It's kind of it inherits a lot of hardware from the space shuttle, but is designed to more accomplish missions like the Saturn V, sending humans to the moon. It can do a few other very large payload things. And so I work on basically the first 8 minutes of the flight, just getting through the atmosphere. Like imagine sticking your hand out the window, driving down the highway. There's a lot of force on your hand. Just multiply that by speeds ranging from standing still on the launch pad to 20 times the speed of sound. And you got to get through all of that. So it's all over quickly compared to the length of the entire mission, but it's a really hard phase of flight.
I would say a critical part of the flight. That's so funny. Like just the first 8 minutes is Derek's job.
Well, I never thought of it that way. I mean, we all are familiar with all the movies and all the live launches where we see different people at different terminals and their different responsibilities. But I never thought about it in a time of the mission breakdown as well.
Yeah. So what kind of things do you need to be aware of when you are responsible for this first 8 missions? Like, what are you using some of these supercomputers to figure out?
With rockets, it's a little bit different from aircraft, which is kind of my other area of specialty. Aircraft, it's flying through the air. Its whole purpose is aerodynamics, right? It has to have lift, and you're worried about fuel consumption. With rockets and launch vehicles, you're kind of handling a lot of random problems. So the biggest scale one is, will the vehicle break? You tend to try to build a launch vehicle basically as light as you possibly can and have it still work. So it's kind of close to, it's hopefully not getting close to breaking, but on the wrong day, you may be like getting close to your limits, because anything you go over your limits, it's just extra weight and therefore less payload to space. So does the vehicle break is really the biggest question.
So I find this interesting. You guys are using something called the NASA Aitken Supercomputer, which is powered by HPE, which, obviously this thing must have intense amounts of computational power. Like, how does this compare back to, the 60s and the 70s? Like, what kind of computing power did they have really compared to this?
Yeah, I think about that a lot, actually, because what we have now is, several petaflops, quintillions of calculations per second we can do on the whole computer. Of course, the computer is shared across many missions, not just Artemis, but like climate change kind of studies and lots of other things, aerodynamics. But we have a pretty good chunk that we generally use for Artemis and related missions. But if you think about the term supercomputing, it's basically just whatever the fastest computers in the world currently are. So in my mind, there's been supercomputers since there were computers. But if you go back to Apollo days, really the most expensive computations they could do required a lot more manual work, and that was doing like trajectories. like, just targeting, landing on the moon, getting to the right spot, that kind of thing. And these days, all that work is mostly done on engineers' laptops
or an iPhone. I think there's probably an app for
iPhone. It can handle it maybe, but the programming would be hard.
Yeah. So you're responsible for the first 8 minutes of this rocket taking off. And obviously you're worried about things breaking. I guess there's like booster rockets that are separating. And so you got to feed all that information into the supercomputer?
Yeah. So you basically, what we end up doing from a very broad stroke is you kind of divide the air around the launch, like this launch vehicle, all the air around it. And you divide that into like points. You have to divide that whole volume into little tetrahedra and cubes, et cetera, things like that. So you can say, what is the velocity? What is the temperature? What is the pressure of the air all around the vehicle at every point? So it's a lot of very similar information, just like pressure, temperature, velocity, but at a lot of points. And you have to solve equations that relate those equations, all those different conditions to each other. So basically, you have to do all this very fine detail work to answer the big question of like how much force is acting on the launch vehicle as you go through the atmosphere.
Do you not have a lot of that information, obviously, from previous? I mean, NASA's been launching rockets and space shuttles for decades now. Like, is that information already available? Don't you already know a lot of this?
This is a kind of thing that tends to vary a lot just from small changes to a vehicle. So you really have to do all that work every time. Like, it's like putting a different tail on the end of an aircraft, right? It's going to have totally different characteristics, even if you have flown the previous one for 20 years. So we have a lot of experience with rockets in general, as you suggest. So there's a lot of the initial engineering is done with that experience, but then the analysis and certification, we use a lot of computational power, and we also use wind tunnel experiments, which are a major part of it. Nobody has quite gone to the step where you want to totally certify a whole vehicle without wind tunnel certification and wind tunnel testing at this point.
So in your group, like, okay, you've got this supercomputer that does the work of many men and women, but how many humans are in your group to make this all work as well? Because obviously it'll take humans to program this and get the information.
Well, the aerodynamics team for Space Launch System has about 25 people. Kind of goes up and down a little bit, but that kind of gives you the sense of scale. And some of those folks are splitting their time with other projects also. So a lot of the computational work is kind of boiled down to maybe 10 people, and some of the experimental work and management work, takes up the other set of people. The boundaries aren't super clearly defined, but that gives you a sense of scale.
Somehow it all works. I just wonder, like, obviously you've got, again, the HP supercomputer there, but the humans have to know what questions to ask as well. Like, how does that come up? Like, you have a meeting, you go down to the local bar and figure this all out?
Yeah, definitely there's a lot of human knowledge involved. We're nowhere near the point where you could just take somebody with no training and turn them into a supercomputing analyst. There's a lot of stuff. I try to document what I do, just for example, and I'm always just amazed at how many little things I do that I never really thought about as a step in a process before. So there's kind of like a breakdown, trying to get from launch to orbit, as I suggested, those 8 minutes. And you kind of just are leaning on all the previous experience of 50 years of spaceflight, 60 years of spaceflight to ask great questions.
And I guess you also have to work pretty closely with the guy that's responsible for the 9-minute mark as well in the launch cycle.
Yeah, so
that's Ed. He's next door.
Yeah, we definitely interact with our, as we call them, customers, who are other NASA engineers who are responsible for the structures of the vehicle. That's a main one. And just like, where does the vehicle fly? That's trajectory, we'll just call it, guidance, navigation, and control.
These things take up a lot of power, though, don't they?
Oh, in terms of like literal electrical power, yeah, it's pretty big. I think we have something like 5 megawatts for our supercomputing facility at NASA Ames, which is pretty sizable. We compare that to like 10,000 order common American homes.
Sorry, so the supercomputer side is taking as much power as 10,000 homes?
That's roughly how I remember it. That's order of magnitude, not too accurate, but and a lot of that
That's a lot of electricity.
Computer, a lot of that would just go into cooling it off.
Yeah.
From what I understand, though, with the HPE computers, they've been able to cut down the amount of electricity and water that they're using to cool it.
Yeah, so that's kind of a pretty interesting thing. Turns out we have a good climate for this kind of design in California here. Even though it gets pretty hot these days, it used to be cooler summers. It seems like it's getting a lot hotter. But even though it's pretty hot, it's really dry. So basically, you can use evaporative cooling to do most of the work. And we say we put our computers outside. That's a little exaggerated. They're in kind of like sheds, very carefully designed sheds, and you don't have to work as hard to cool it off as you would in the inside of a building.
It's interesting. You use a lot of water to cool the supercomputers, and from some of the stats I'm reading, you can actually save using these new HPE ones over 1 million gallons of water per day. That's like a lot of water.
Yeah, it's pretty staggering. That's not like just water that goes down the drain. It's literally evaporated.
Derek, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube page. And you know that little bell icon? Hit that and you'll be notified every time we post a new video. And comment. The more comments and the more likes and subscriptions we get, the more videos we can make.